Hey, welcome to Film Fanatics, three film geeks discussing movies both new and old. I'm Dan.
I'm Justin.
Joe.
This week the world is overrun with apes again in Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. The world is frozen over again in Snowpiercer. Mark Ruffalo is an out-of-work record exec looking to break a new discovery in Begin Again, and we'll also review the new film from Oscar winner Paul Haggis, Third Person. In our home media moment, it's drama Run and Jump, starring Will Forte. Now, our top 5 this week is all aboard with our top 5 train movies in honor of Snowpiercer. And our triple feature of older movies is new classic The Conjuring, Justin's pick for old classic Ravenous, and the Oscar A to Z American Gangster. A lot of movies to cover, so let's get right to it with Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. A huge $70 million opening this weekend for that, and Joe's going to tell us about it.
All right. Apes, the sequel to the prequel/reboot of the influential sci-fi franchise, directed by Matt Reeves, and starring Andy Serkis, Jason Clarke, and Gary Oldman. This series opens up about 10 years after the last film. The virus has wiped out most of humanity, and Caesar, who's played by Serkis, and his tribe of apes have flourished and become a community. Caesar even has a family now, and keeps most of the apes in check, including his rival Koba. Everything seems to be going fine until a small band of humans stumble upon their home. While some are quick to violence, Malcolm, played by Clark, decides to try and find a way to create peace as his people attempt to get an old man up and running. Sadly, tension rises and a conspiracy looms within the ape community to start a war between them and the humans, led by Dreyfus, played by Gary Oldman. This film is a promising sequel, really continuing to make the classic series into a direction which is rather different, but with the same ideas as the original. The little touches are nice, such as the soundtrack containing sharp percussion and haunting echoes of the first film. Perhaps the greatest strength here is the beautiful CGI work to bring these apes to life and the quiet use of very little spoken dialogue to carry many conversations. In addition, Andy Serkis and the other performers shine as well, using subtlety to convey so much. The story is compelling and the action is decent enough to keep you invested with the stakes that are relatively high. Sadly, the human story is a little less developed, with less time being spent on the characters like Dreyfus, who admittedly is a sympathetic villain, but this is due I think more to Oldman's portrayal than the writing. The runtime does go on a bit long, and there is a tad of melodrama. Still, this is a worthwhile follow-up that has me truly curious to see where the franchise is going, and I give it a B+.
Okay, and just for comparison's sake, what did you give the Rise of the Planet of the Apes?
A-.
Okay. Justin, what do you think of this one?
The Planet of the Apes franchise has been known for its dark adventure storylines, with mostly haunting endings, but with the sequel of the reboot, Rise of the Planet of the Apes, Dawn not only serves as a great follow-up, but a clever homage to the original franchise as well. This is largely thanks to the brave decision in the last film to create the apes through motion capture CGI, most notably done by Serkis, whose performance could call into question whether or not it warrants an Oscar nomination. Through simple body language as well as subtlety and a few words, Serkis presents the audience with a leader who's both willing to negotiate but prepared to fight should it be considered necessary. His inner conflicts, as well as those with the humans, provide suspense and intensity that permeates through the majority of the film's 2-hour and 10-minute running time. That said, where the film falters a bit is with its antagonists. While I don't fault director Matt Reeves for offering up both a human and an ape villain, I do have some trouble when they give Koba the ape, who serves as the antagonist for Caesar, an entire conflict, and essentially gives Oldman nothing to do until the very end. That aside, this all leads up to a conclusion that fits in perfectly with the original franchise, as well as the reboot, and I give it a B+ as well.
And what did you give the original in this series?
The original of this series, a B.
So a little bit better than the last.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I gave The Rise a B+, and James Franco and the story with his father, John Lithgow, was one of my favorite things about that film, and this one is so good even without much for the humans to do, as you both sort of hit on, is a testament to just how strong the story is here and how far the apes have come as characters in their own right. And I would argue, like you gentlemen, that you get a much better sense of character in a handful of the apes than you do really with any of the humans. Mm-hmm. But Andy Serkis and the effects team have done a phenomenal job of giving specific personalities to probably a dozen or more apes in this film, and they look fantastic as well. The whole film actually looks fantastic. Justin, I echo your sentiments as well with the motion capture instead of using CGI. I think it really makes it look so much more authentic, and It's visually appealing, and the 3D is among the best that I personally have ever seen. Another strong part of the films is, both of them really, is how the audience can really relate to both sides, and I think even more so in this one than the last one, because really it's a story of two groups of people just trying to stop their home from being taken away from them. It's an intelligent film, both in its script and its execution, that I think does top the first one in the series, and I give it an A-. I really struggled in the grade because the human characters really...
They're a little weak.
They're weak. They need work.
They're not bad, but the problem is there's very little of them. Jason Clarke does a good job, but there's really not much for his character.
Right.
It's like, okay, wife died, here's my motivation, I'm a nice guy.
Yeah.
We believe it, but there's not much there.
Same with Carrie Russell character.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, yeah, she's a doctor, and she's going to help Caesar.
We get all these little tidbits on almost all the characters.
It's enough.
And it's enough. It gives them enough backstory on where they stand with the whole matter.
But it's not really that well rounded.
And they never go deeper than like a couple hints here and there. And once those hints are mildly touched upon, they never come back.
Yeah.
And that was like how I felt about Gary Oldman. Like, we see like these few scenes where like, wow, there's something really interesting. There's a lot this character could do. And Gary Oldman has a tendency to flesh out these characters. But he's barely in the movie, and then he's at the end, and we're supposed to feel like all this heavy weight towards what he's doing. And I'm just kind of like, oh, well, you're just kind of annoying. You know, and I just feel like that was where the film suffered, is in the human element, which you could argue is that really a negative because it's about the apes.
And that was sort of my point. I mean, I think that the biggest rivalry in the whole movie really is between Caesar and Koba.
Which is very well done.
Yeah, which is very well done, as opposed to the apes versus the humans.
Yeah, and that's the problem, is that they try to have the dynamic between the apes and the humans, but the story's not really about that, which is, I think, in one area where it falters. They want to tell these two stories, where the more interesting one, the one they focus on, is very good, and that's where stems from real conflict, whereas the human thing seems just kind of like something in the background.
I mean, obviously, you need the human element to propel the story forward. Otherwise, you know, there's no real conflict between the apes to begin with.
That's true. But, I mean, they try to build up the other side of, like, showing the other side demonstrating the fear with the humans, but it's barely there. Yeah. It's like we've got one guy that's disgruntled, and we've got Gary Oldman. Other than that, we don't get much of a sense the humans have a problem. They're, like, afraid, but it's not like we should kill the apes.
Right.
You know? Then that's where it's a little weak. There's not that much of a balance there for a human element.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Now, Joe, I know, or maybe Justin as well, but Joe, I know you're pretty proficient with knowledge of the original series. I haven't seen any of the really old ones. I've seen pieces of that terrible remake they did like a decade ago.
Oh. What are you talking about, Dan?
The Burton remake.
Whatever you're talking about. Tim Burton made a Planet of the Apes movie? God, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Do these sort of mirror the feel of the original series of films with Charlton Heston, do you think?
I guess I'd answer yes and no. It's like I said in my review, they take the story a very different direction, but the spirit and the same ideas are the same. And there are little tidbits that I did like that I picked up on. Like the soundtrack, it's this very subtle, kind of minimalistic little drumming and panging with like grunts in the background. That's straight from the original soundtrack. Okay. I love that. And I saw it with my sister, because she and I love Planet of the Apes growing up, was one of our favorite things. And she actually like pointed that out to me. She's like, I love this music. It's like the originals. And it was. It was like almost, it wasn't the same, but you could tell that's what they were going for. And that's subtle that you could tell somebody that really appreciates the originals, newer audiences would not get.
Right.
So there's still that love of the original I did like. And the same concept is there. Like they're kind of doing elements from when the apes were taking over. It's a very different story, but the progression of the plot is similar. And there was also another little tidbit I liked too that I actually didn't catch on the first one. Apparently Maurice, the name of the orangutan, he's called Maurice because the actor that portrayed Dr. Zaius, who was an orangutan, was Maurice. Oh, and that's something I didn't know. So you can tell
that's a nice nod.
The people that at least wrote these movies, they know
have
some
stuff. Reverence.
So they're trying, definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
Spirit's there.
If I may add in on this, Rise of the Planet of the Apes sort of tries to pay homage, but just does like a little couple Easter eggs here and there. I felt like Dawn of the Planet of the Apes was more or less very much a spiritual successor to the original franchise. Felt very much more like the original one with the music, with the tone, and particularly for me, I reflected on this for hours after I got done with it. But the ending is very much in sync with the original series.
It's kind of like sort of this ominous, dark way. Like it's uplifting, but only kind of, sort of.
Pretty much. Like, I mean, even with the exception of the last movie in the original franchise, all of them do not have happy endings.
That's true. And I will say, though, I think in terms of this film, I do agree with you the first one is a little more of an original take. But I think the reason why it's so different is because, it's like I said, they're taking the story a different direction. They're establishing it in the 21st century. It's more about genetics as opposed to nuclear warfare, something a little more timely. But the same idea between racism is still there, class conflict, people getting so laid into their views and narrow points of view. I mean, the same basic, more universal themes are still there. But you're right. Some things about the plot are radically different, obviously. But I think that's to make it cater to a newer audience.
Justin, I wanted to ask you, because you did mention the Andy Serkis nomination possibility. That's something that's been bandied about really for years. I mean, I don't know that these movies are the way to go. I mean, I think if he was going to get one, it probably should have been for Gollum in one of the Lord of the Rings movies, or possibly The Hobbit.
Well, I'm going to stop you right there, Dan. If he didn't win them for Gollum, he's not going to win this for this.
Well, that's what I mean.
He should win it for this. He should win it all the time. And as people have been saying, he should win an Oscar. He's a great actor.
He is.
And whether or not the Academy wants to acknowledge it or not, he deserves it. So, excuse me, but who cares what they think? Literally, everybody on the internet's like, give him an Oscar. Yeah. They're not going to. Maybe a nomination if we're lucky. He's not going to win anything. And you know what? He deserves it, so who cares?
Let's be honest. 2014 has been a lousy year for movies. If we're going to debate whether or not a guy did an amazing performance with simply mocap and managed to pull it off beautifully, I say absolutely.
Well, I guess my sort of sticking point with that is, and I'm not saying whether it's deserved or not deserved, but, Lord of the Rings all got nominated for Best Picture. They all got nominated for many things. I don't think Planet of the Apes is the type of movie that's going to get nominated at all, except for in the effects category.
I do think that as a whole, Lord of the Rings has, I think, a wider fan base to push that sort of thing, which is why the Academy kind of was a little more pressured.
Yeah.
Rise of the Apes, I don't think the Apes is quite as big. And I think it's a little more of a summer blockbuster action movie than Lord of the Rings, which is an epic story.
Which is an epic, right, right.
It's a little different.
Which is why I say that.
But, I mean, look at 2009 when District 9 got nominated.
But the point is, when it comes to Andy Serkis, it's one of those things that people aren't even debating it. People have been saying he deserves to win for a long time. It's not like, if they give him a nomination, people are like, well, it's like giving Leo a nomination. Give him an award.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, we don't care about nominations at this point.
Right.
We're past that point.
Okay.
It's not like Amy Adams. Like, she deserves one too.
Well, yeah,
It's really...
It's frustrating.
Yes, he should win, but he's not going to, so let's move on.
All right. Well, with that in mind, let's move on. Our next movie is Snowpiercer, and Justin is going to tell us about that.
After an experiment to stop global warming goes horribly wrong in 2014, the remaining survivors of the human race live aboard the Snowpiercer, an enormous train traveling across the globe. Years later, Curtis, played by Chris Evans, a man disgusted with the living conditions in the tail section of the train car, prepares a full-scale rebellion in an attempt to confront the man responsible for their overall situation and why the guards have been taking their children. The first film I saw from South Korean director Joon-ho Bong was The Host, not the awful one from last year, and while I did enjoy it as both a monster movie and its occasionally hilarious dysfunctional family bits, I found the underlying themes a bit heavy-handed in contrast to the overall film as a whole. However, 8 years later, Bong has truly shown off how much he's grown, making easily one of the most thought-provoking yet accessible action films in ages. While the train location offers up a claustrophobic feeling, the way Bong shoots his action sequences offers up such vibrant intensity within these seemingly endless cars as Evans fights his way to the front. It can become a bit much at times, but it never reaches the point of being overly predictable. Alongside this are also great characters, notably Evans as our reluctant hero, who may have more compelling reasons to be struggling with being a leader than he lets on. That said, most of the side characters, while memorable, are a bit underdeveloped, and at one point one could argue there's a rather forced moment for exposition, but these can largely be overlooked. Snowpiercer is a thoroughly entertaining dystopian action thriller that I can easily see getting better on repeat viewings, and I give it an A-.
In a summer full of actually decent non-superhero action movies, we had Edge of Tomorrow, The Apes, even Godzilla wasn't that bad. Snowpiercer is the crowning achievement. Its commentary on class struggle, power, and other social issues is surrounded by this completely engaging story and nary a plot hole that I can think of, and world-class performances from Chris Evans and an unrecognizable Tilda Swinton, among others. Even though the train has many different rooms and set pieces, most of the train cars seem to have the exact same dimensions, yet the film never feels redundant. And it also never seems to insult the viewer's intelligence. It's the type of movie that sucks you in so much that when one of the bad guys gets what's coming to them, you want to just erupt in cheers, as the audience I was watching with actually did at one point. Snowpiercer takes my third A for 2014. Joe?
Post-apocalyptic society on a train. It's a cool idea, and it's executed well here. Chris Evans gives perhaps his best performance. There is true horrifying grittiness within the society, as well as an almost cartoony atmosphere which strangely fits the madness. A great cast is here, and they mostly play quirky but complex characters. There's great action and clever camera work that sets to create a large world in a mostly confined space. Sadly, while the big reveal is satisfying, it's pretty obvious to at least partially figure out, though the circumstances don't detract from the horror. The ending is also a bit frustrating, but for the most part it's a perfectly crafted little story. With the exception of some minor side characters, which Justin kind of pointed out. Overall, though, I would give it an A-.
I did not think it was all that obvious.
It's pretty obvious.
Is it? Did you think it was obvious, Justin?
I mean,
The notes coming from the head of the train.
that I figured was going
like-
somewhere.
I'm
I
like-
mean, I
I'm
figured
like-
that was...
I mean, I had some guesses about that.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it was bad, because he's obviously so focused on his hatred, but, I mean, I pretty much knew what was...
Okay.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe
I was so engaged,
No,
in the...
The point is, I've seen a lot of movies like this.
Yeah,
like,
that's true.
Plot twists like this have been done before. I mean, it's not... The setting is really original. The story is not.
Okay.
But it's good.
That's fair.
It's well executed, but it's not like...
It's basically like a modernized version of Metropolis on a train.
Exactly. That's
Which
a
I'm
good
cool
example.
with. I mean, in the many movies that have tried to play off of Metropolis, this is the first one that's done it as well to the level that we could possibly do it in this generation.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned.
It's pretty good.
I do have my issues with it. I've read a lot of places people have issues with the ending. I personally liked it. I thought it was a really good...
I liked it, too.
I thought it was a really good metaphor.
I can't say that it was completely satisfying as to what I wanted to have happen, but I was satisfied with what did happen and how it was executed.
It's just like the way it happened, it kind of makes you feel like something's going to be a certain way. And I mean, I guess it's supposed to give you hope, but then if you think about it logically for a second, it doesn't. If you know what I'm saying.
Yes, I do.
So, I mean, maybe that's the darkly ironic element of it, but it feels contradictory. Like, you spend your whole movie building up certain characters, and then you get to a certain point where it's like, oh, there's really no reason this happened. And maybe that's a lot darker than you give the movie credit for. Maybe that's a good element.
I was going to say, I like the fact that it got darker as the film going on. It gave the characters more dimensions. I agree with you on the fact that it's Chris Evans' best performance.
I do too.
Because he went so much further into this character than he's done with Captain America, the Human Torch, or any other comic book character.
I would say he goes more into this character than he is allowed to do with Captain America, etc.
I think Captain
I don't
America
think
has
that's to his fault. You know?
I think Captain America is pretty dynamic, but he also has to be Captain America.
Right.
This is true.
Right, and I think that holds him back from
really
exploring the character.
Because Captain America is allowed to have a dark side, but he can't be too dark because he's Captain America.
Right. What did you guys think of Tilda Swinton?
Took a little bit to get used to her, but once the film went on and we saw how she fits in with the whole rebellion to the top, I was okay with it. I feel like she fit in very well with, okay, we have this whole class conflict bit, but we also have her serving briefly as a sort of like mediary to that.
What did you guys think of the choice to sort of leave her as an ambiguous figure in terms of her sex? The character was written as a man, and at one point they even referred to Tilda Swinton as he.
I think that was more of a military thing, though.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Because in certain contexts, they usually refer to them as just a sir. But whether or not she had a sex necessarily might have been part of the strangeness of it.
Yes, I found that to be quite intriguing.
I mean, she was pretty awesome, but the cool thing about her was you didn't exactly know how she fit into things.
Right.
Because she seemed evil, but at the same time, it was like you could tell she really was
she
the
was
middleman.
she was probably the biggest question mark of any of them.
She was really the face, is what it was. Like, you have your dignitary, but you wonder, like, how bad is she? I don't know. It was kind of interesting because you could tell she was really that middle ground.
All right, well, up next, we're going to do Begin Again. This is the second film written and directed entirely by John Carney of Once fame. It's another music-centered film about two people coming together over their love of music and beginning a harmonious relationship, this time with Mark Ruffalo as recently fired record executive Dan, and Keira Knightley as Greta, his discovery at a late-night bar, her last night in the States before moving back to England, as her relationship with hit singer Dave Cole, played by Maroon 5's Adam Levine, has fallen apart. Now, Greta doesn't want to participate in Dan's idea to make an album, as she sees herself merely as a songwriter and not a performer. Meanwhile, Dan is struggling to connect with his teenage daughter, played by Haley Steinfeld, and his estranged wife, Catherine Keener. Sometimes lightning actually can strike twice. Begin Again has a lot in common with Carney's Once, however, it is far from a carbon copy. For one thing, whereas Once was as much a romance film as it was a music film, this one veers far from allowing a cliched attraction between the two leads, focusing that aspect of the story on Greta's former relationship with Dave and Dan trying to become closer to his daughter. It's one of many strong choices the film makes that didn't go the way I expected. The music is great, though I go back and forth on how important the lack of some of the realism of the film is. I can see a lot of things in this movie actually happening, but you really do have to suspend some of your disbelief on certain others. I decided overall that it doesn't bother me that much, but it definitely lacks some authenticity, which in Once was practically oozing off the screen. And in a film where one of the more memorable scenes involves Dan and Greta discussing how the entire music biz is inauthentic, I had to laugh a little bit at the irony. But it is a very cute film with good performances and great music, so I give Begin Again a B+. Justin?
Movies like Begin Again make me loathe being a critic. I don't like being mean, and it seriously does hurt me when I have to give a film an F. But when a film does not deliver, I have to tell it how it is.
What?
Wow! Wait! Okay.
Plot twist. See, he was holding back.
Though for this film, I should probably start with easily the best thing it has going for it, the music. Just about every song in this film is memorable, and performed beautifully by the cast that truly brings it to life. It's a complete shame that this is paired with such a mediocre story in which 10 minutes in the beginning are wasted on an essentially pointless flashback, and a moment of magical realism that's meant to come off as clever but ends up being silly. It's also sort of ironic that a story about going against the grain and producing material independently uses so many popular celebrities like Knightley, Adam Levine, and CeeLo Green, who serves no greater purpose than to be a walking, rapping plot device. In all honesty, the intent is noble, but neither Knightley nor Ruffalo's backstory is all that interesting until the two actually decide to talk about their takes on music. These scenes are clearly not meant to add anything, but in actuality, they're probably the best narrative components of the film. Overall, despite my gripes, I was never really bored with this film, and watching them record the music in various locales is interesting. Though as Green raps at one point, you're only as strong as your next move. And for the director of a groundbreaking musical like Once, Begin Again just barely cuts above average, and I give it a C+.
Okay, you made it seem like you were going to fail it, Justin.
No, I just thought it was...
But I hate to fail things.
When you have a great film like Once, and this is what you follow it up with...
I never saw it, so...
It's a fantastic
Once
movie.
is great. I think Justin probably likes it a little more than I do, but I gave it an A, I believe.
Same.
Joe, let's go to you before we get into the discussion mode of Begin Again.
Well, I don't know. I really liked Mark Ruffalo's character, and I liked Keira Knightley, and I thought that the weird, interjection between their stories and seeing their different perspectives as they came together, kind of building up their own situations, I thought that was kind of awesome. I really liked these people. I believed they were who they were. I did think some of the conversations were a little bit on the nose. I didn't think they needed to insult Bob Dylan just because he wore certain sunglasses. To make it in the music industry, it is about performing. It is about selling yourself a bit to get your message out there. But I don't think that makes their music and their message any less authentic. Mm-hmm. So I just thought that was a little bit of an undercut there. That did rub me a little bit the wrong way. But still, I really did admire the actual nature of the story. I thought that some of the subplots were good. I liked the fact that his daughter came along and there was that bonding there.
I do too. I thought that was one of the strongest scenes in the film.
Definitely the best scenes in the movie are when they're actually filming, and the fact that this film is really just about music and how important it is and how powerful it is, and just kind of the whole everlasting debate about any artistic form between, keeping artistic integrity versus making a living and selling out and just struggling with that, and everybody pursuing their own dreams. I thought it was a really, really good message. I really enjoyed it. The only thing I did not like about the ending, it was a very frustrating ending, a big contradiction.
Some of the inauthenticity that I was referring
it's like I was saying, okay, so you want to like say this girl's a great musician, which she is, great star, great band, like this band, like this group of people that got together made me want to record an album. Like I recorded some music like back in the day. I just it made me remember what it was like to be in a band and just try to like do your own thing and make demos. That's the strong thing about this movie. It just made me feel like you just want to see them succeed and just get it out there and just go touring, and now we're going to do this, which is cool. I'm actually cool for that too, if you just want to be more laid back and just do the music. It was a big contradiction. The ending was a contradiction, and I just didn't like that.
It felt tacked on.
Well, I don't think it was a contradiction based on how her character was the whole movie.
Yes, but did it really make sense? Completely. Because
it wouldn't have been my decision, no.
But the thing is like, okay, she said she wants to do this, and then she does something else, and you're just like, well, you're not even completely sure with what you want to do. That's where I have a problem with it, because it's like saying, okay,
that makes sense.
I don't want to get out there, but I do want to get out there. And overall though, I did really like it, a lot more than I was expecting to, and I also give it a B+.
Nice. I will say that the end sequence is
I thought it was over.
Yeah.
And then they did that thing.
The credit sequence. It wasn't good.
I was like,
they should have left that out.
Just leave it open ended. Because I was okay.
Agree.
Like I would have rather had it open ended than just say, oh, we're gonna kind of cop out here. Oh, sure, she's not selling out, but she still kind of is.
Justin, obviously,
bigger problem.
More things about the film bugged you than it did us. Do you want to talk a little more about the specifics of those?
Like, for example, we have the opening scene, which is good, and then they decide, okay, we're going to literally jump back 4 or 5 hours, give you everything you need to know about Mark Ruffalo's day up until that point, which is essentially useless. You could have easily...
I thought that was awesome.
I thought it gave you a lot of insight into his character.
I thought it was a really cool trick, because like we see this random guy staring at her, and then we see a whole nother perspective to this guy's day, how nothing is going right for him, and then it just builds up to see he sees her, and like it all turns around. Like, I mean, that was awesome.
I really like that.
Like, you understand why this guy looks so happy.
But was the flashback really necessary? My argument is you could have easily just brought that up in like 1 or 2 different conversations. Would have shaved off so much time.
Yeah, then you're right. If you're talking about shaving off time, you're right. They could, with like 1 or 2 well-done conversations, they could have done that. But it was a lot more fun to do it this way.
Yeah. And I don't think the movie was overly long.
No.
So it's not like they didn't have those few minutes.
Because it would have just been like, hey, okay, yeah, my car broke down, I got fired, blah, blah. It's a lot more interesting to see these things play out and have him interact with characters than just saying it.
Well, it especially sets up the relationship with his daughter.
Justin, show, don't tell.
Show, don't tell, yes, but there's a point where you're literally detracting from the overall story.
I don't think so.
Like I said,
I didn't think it was.
Show, don't tell is fine. But when show don't tell is literally interrupting the story to bring up a flashback that you could easily...
Justin, how does establishing his character strongly hurt the story?
When you literally devote a pointless flashback in the beginning.
It wasn't pointless, though. It established his character.
It was a pointless flashback. You don't need...
Justin, you might not have needed to do it that particular way, but it was still a good way to establish the character. You saw a series of events about leading up to the point you showed in the movie.
And I don't think they were stopping the story to do that. The story was just beginning.
It was still beginning on 2 perspectives.
They started at one point, then they literally jumped back.
Yeah, but only a few minutes into the movie. It's not like they did that a half hour in after we already met his character. Like,
it was still the beginning.
You know what I mean? Like, it was still the beginning of the movie.
It was when you're literally starting the movie and then saying, "Oh wait, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's tell you what happened before this." That's delightful, but I don't really care that much. And if you're going to do that, why not just start with him and work our way to that point? And you'll get the same effect.
Look, one of the things that was so great about Carney's Once is that it was a bit unconventional. And I think telling the story in the way you just described, having us do his whole day first, and then looking at Keira Knightley on the stage, that is the most commonplace way to do that. And I don't think he wanted to do it that way.
Tell me something, Dan. What was unconventional about Once? Other than the fact that it was low budget.
It was not really like their story, but I mean, it was 2 complete no-name actor and actress that were a couple in real life, making the music that they actually wrote in real life in the movie. Everything was unconventional about Once.
I feel like if Tarantino did something like this, you wouldn't have a problem with it. Because it's like what he does all the time. He does stuff like that all the time.
Yeah, but he doesn't devote gigantic sequences of time to them.
Yes, he does. He spends like entire chunks of movies developing characters out of sequence. That's Pulp Fiction.
That is Pulp Fiction.
That's Reservoir Dogs.
But
you know,
here's the thing:
it's Kill Bill. It's like most of his freaking filmography.
Yes, but he's also doing that in terms of telling the story out of chronological order. There's a difference between doing that and then wasting time on a completely unnecessary flashback that's literally sucking up the amount of time you should be getting engrossed in the story instead of deciding to play for exposition.
The flashback is a way of telling the story out of chronological order.
No, it's not. It's just bad writing. I'm sorry.
Not
Flashbacks are lazy.
Flashbacks are lazy?
Flashbacks are lazy.
Flashbacks are awesome. People love flashbacks. Flashbacks are cool.
The first sign of generally bad writing is flashbacks.
Oh, I don't agree with that at all.
I
mean, I'm sure there are tons of movies that you love, Justin, that have flashback sequences.
Yes,
many movies do.
I guess they're all bad writing.
Some implement them better than others. I'll grant you that. But
that's a new one.
That's a very broad statement that I just can't agree with.
Terminator has flashbacks.
Going back to your comment on Once, which was a fantastic film. I mean, yes, it was unconventional in terms of it being low budget and they were a couple and they wrote their own music. I agree with you. That's great. I'm not sure if I agree with you on the fact that it's necessarily unconventional.
Well, it makes it a lot more authentic than Begin Again.
Which brings me to point number 2 about this, the fact that we're trying to tell the story about, being independent, making your own name for yourself, and just getting the music out there because that's really what it's all about. And yet we're having all these big name people getting on top of it, like Keira Knightley, like Adam Levine, and CeeLo Green, all of whom I'm not entirely sure what they were doing in this movie. They don't give bad performances, but I wouldn't say they're great picks for a movie that's preaching this message.
I can answer that in a couple different ways. First of all, if there was all no names in the cast, it's literally Once all over again. But number 2, I think he wanted people that could sing, and Adam Levine can certainly sing, and he knocks the song at the end of the movie out of the park.
It's the best part.
It's one of the best parts of the movie.
I'm gonna buy that song.
Obviously, with Adam's stuff on The Voice, he's looking to break into other avenues.
He was good.
So, I mean, I thought he did a good job.
No, I'm not knocking either of the performances other than CeeLo Green being a very poorly written character, but
I think he was there, though, Justin, to show that
Mark Ruffalo was a nice guy.
Yeah, that Mark Ruffalo at one point really was on top of his game.
Because he discovered CeeLo Green.
He discovered this CeeLo Green character who was basically
himself.
Kind of CeeLo Green.
They called him something else, like Muffin Man or something.
But
something weird like that. Rumble, was it?
Something like that.
Rumble.
But I think he was there to sort of prove
Elevate
that,
Ruffalo.
This guy really did have something at one point that he's clearly lost.
He was and then they kick him to the curb.
I don't know. I didn't think his character was useless.
No, I'm not saying that his character was useless. I'm just saying he was essentially just...
Well, it was basically just a glorified cameo. That's all it was.
Essentially, which is part of the reason why it annoyed me. It's like, I get why you're here, but you're essentially a walking, talking plot device.
He was the main reason I wanted to see the movie. It was exceptionally
good. He's very
good.
popular.
Right? I thought he was cool. But I think he serves his purpose.
And I think Adam Levine does as well.
Yeah.
I think calling him Dave Cole was a bit lazy. Dave Grohl, Dave Cole, it's spelled the same way. Like, he could have at least spelled it Cole, C-O-L-E.
Maybe
he spells it K-O-H-L, like Grohl with a K.
They didn't think people would get it.
I was going to say, I didn't think of it, but I see where you're coming from.
I didn't care for that too much. That was a little lazy. But, all right, well, some differing opinions there for sure. Let's get to our next movie, which is Third Person, and Justin's got that.
Michael, played by Liam Neeson, is a Pulitzer Prize-winning writer who recently left his wife, Elaine, played by Kim Basinger, to finish his latest book in Paris while having an affair with a young journalist named Anna, played by Olivia Wilde. As this goes on, 2 other seemingly unrelated stories involving an American, played by Adrian Brody, struggling to help a beautiful woman, played by Maureen Atius, reunite with her daughter, and an ex-soap star, played by Mila Kunis, battles to get custody over her son from her ex-husband, played by James Franco, as each story starts to influence the other. I feel like there's a quote from Roman Polanski's The Ghostwriter that sums my reaction to this film perfectly. Well, all the words are there, they're just in the wrong order. There are some legitimate moments in which Third Person has promise of being a better movie, but more often than not, it gets bogged down by weak and mostly melodramatic dialogue that's meant to sound more clever than it actually is. Granted, some of this is justified during the resolution, albeit it didn't help that the trailers ruined much of the twist. But the long, strenuous journey to that point is, for lack of a better word, exhausting. That said, where I will give third-person credit is making use of nearly every person in the ensemble cast. Although the story is told in somewhat vignettes, each character has a specific goal and does tie into the central story relatively well. These easily serve as the best scenes in the entire film and really make one wonder what this could have been like with a bit more time to polish things up. As a whole, though, third person's a bit of a mishmash, but by the end, the performances keep it from being awful to almost above mediocrity, and I give it a C.
Joe, what did you think of third person?
No film has ever been more frustrating to me than this one. I was actually going to avoid this, but Dan specifically told me that I should see it. Well, it was rough, but I understand why. This movie has a cool concept, except that you kind of can see where these characters are and what their purpose is from the trailer, as Justin pointed out, so it kind of killed a lot of the suspense. They're good characters, but sometimes the stories will jump around so much with no rhyme or reason. So much so that you just want to stick with one before another one cuts in to infuriate you with another. The payoff was okay, but I never ever want to watch this again. And it's only because there were great performances and kind of a cool idea that I don't fail it, and I give it a D.
Well, I'm sort of in between you guys here. The thing that filmmakers need to realize when embarking on this type of a project where there's several different storylines that seem unrelated, unless you've seen the trailer, but eventually sort of connect, is that the film is really only as strong as its weakest storyline. And in terms of third person, that's actually the entire crux of the film. The Liam Neeson Olivia Wilde storyline was just not good. It started out okay, but with each of their scenes it kept getting more and more grating, to the point where every time they were on screen, I liked the movie less and less. I would say the most interesting story is probably with Adrian Brody. However, its resolution is horrible. I never got any real payoff from it. Certainly not what I was looking for.
Dan, that was my least favorite.
That was your least favorite?
Same.
Okay.
Because I liked him. Like, believe me, you'd think Mafia, Italy,
Yeah.
Adrian Brody. I should have liked that one. That woman was the most annoying.
She was the worst. I know.
Everything he could do.
She was the worst.
Everything he could do. No, I'm not going to help you.
Yeah.
Oh, no, what are you doing? What are you getting my money? I'm obviously trying to help you.
I was just hoping for something
to strangle
at
her.
the payoff, and it just wasn't there.
I mean, I'm happy with how their story resolved.
No, it wasn't.
No. I'm glad that it had the happy ending to tie in with all the other happy endings, with the whole resolution. Like, I'm livid. Like every time that story came on, I was just like,
see, that was me with Neeson and Wilde.
like I don't know. Like,
Every time it came back to them, I was like, it was like nails on a chalkboard. The Franco and Mila Kunis story could have perhaps been good, but they get so little screen time compared to the other two stories.
Franco's perspective, he had like maybe 3 half scenes.
Exactly.
Yeah, basically.
But you don't even get to know their characters.
There was no correlation. Like, we'll cut back. We'll go to Mila Kunis, then we'll go to Neeson, then we'll go to Mila Kunis, then we'll cut to Franco. Then we'll come back. We'll do Brody, and then we'll go back to Neeson. Then more Neeson. Then we'll do.
It's a lot of Neeson.
There was no order. There was no order. It's not like it wasn't even. It was like and there was no like diverted time between the scenes. Like they'd have like 15 minutes on one storyline, and then they do 2 minutes of another, and then it would come back to like 15 minutes of the same last one. I'm like, why can't we stick more time to this one?
I agree.
I'm just like,
yeah, and that's why I wanted you to watch this, Joe, because anyway, I'm glad you did watch it. In all, I can't say third person was necessarily boring, but it leaves a lot to be desired. And unlike Begin Again for John Carney, lightning definitely did not strike twice for Crash director Haggis with this style of a film, and for me it gets a D+.
I will say this much. Even though I think the pacing and the balance between the storylines was terrible, which it really was, if I hadn't seen the trailer, still think I would have sort of known what was going on, and by the ending would have had more payoff, and I did like the ending. That final scene where they finally showed
the ending wasn't bad.
The whole, coming around to whatever they started into was creepy. I got it. I feel like if you didn't know what was going on, you'd be like, oh.
It's one of the most revealing trailers.
It angered me because, I mean, like, I'm not saying it would have been perfect.
Right.
But I feel like there is enough, like, hint of brilliance here that if you didn't know what was going on, if you didn't see the trailer, it might have been, like, a little profound if you stuck with, like, oh, that's great.
Which is essentially why I chose to give it a C. Yes, the trailer gives a fair good bit away of where the story's heading. But, I mean, if you didn't know that, I still think it would have been
you would have been more
little
confused.
bit better.
And well,
I don't know.
to be honest, I would have probably given it a little higher grade if it wasn't for the trailer, I admit. But I feel like for the casual viewer, this would have been really confusing because even within the context of his so-called novel he's writing, some of the storylines are not connected.
Correct.
Like okay, thematically, by the end of the movie, they're connected, but the whole mafia kidnapping thing versus a girl almost killing her son, like the characters don't even like randomly meet like it's, Magnolia or something.
Right.
Not even like a slight hint.
No.
Like in a novel, even if you're trying to do something really thematic where like...
And that's what I was waiting for, like the whole movie.
I just want them to like, even if it's just them passing by and it's like ironic, like, two different people and they never talk to each other but they got these crazy lives. Even if it's just like one little scene, just one to like even remotely connect them, I like that stuff normally.
Right.
Like some of my favorite movies are like what this movie was trying to do, except...
Right, the Brody storyline, your least favorite, and yours too, Justin,
oh my God.
had no correlation between either of the other storylines whatsoever.
Until the end.
Yeah, well, I mean, at the end, right, they all converge.
When it's like, they are all connected.
But right, like at least Mila Kunis is the maid at the hotel.
It's like I wanted this movie to have a good ending. I wanted to resolve, but every time they moved to a different scene, this is literally what I did. Like, in the theater, I was literally like, I had my head back and I'm just like, ugh. like I'm just gonna be stuck here forever. Like this
I may die before this movie's over.
Seriously, this movie felt like it was never gonna end. I'm like it felt like they weren't going anywhere. These characters weren't progressing.
It was a bad movie.
It was really bad, but the performances were very good.
Yes,
because you've got
another
A
reason
cast.
why I can't give it as low a grade as you both.
Well,
nobody really does a bad job.
To call it average is a little rough.
Yeah, I think just because actors are doing well with horrible material.
Stylistically, I actually kind of enjoyed it in terms of interesting camera angles. Really loved the one intense scene later on with Mila Kunis, finally over at James Franco's studio.
Honestly, I thought there were so many close-ups the movie didn't have much scope for me.
Yeah, I didn't think the directing was all that good in this.
I felt the whole movie made me feel claustrophobic, and we got Italy, we've got France.
There were a lot of mid-level shots, but I wouldn't say it was as close-up heavy as you're making it out to be.
No, it wasn't like super close-up, but it was just mostly like inside houses. It was mostly inside. We didn't have any establishing shots really. And everything was so close cut and so quickly edited. It's like I said, you didn't have time to catch a breath to take anything in. I don't remember many scenes. All I remember is hotel rooms and inside of cars. And if we don't have enough of a shot to establish where the people are, it makes me feel like they're all in the same place, which I know some of them definitely were not.
Yeah,
Quote Adrian Brody. He could have been around the block, but he was supposed to be in Italy. They say he's in Italy. Do we even get one shot establishing Italy?
No.
We get like one shot at the beginning where he takes the plans.
Or something like that.
Yeah, and we see like over a bridge partially. That's it. We need like a little bit of establishment to show where these characters are in the scene. It doesn't have to be anything massive. I don't need like long sweeping shots of Milan or wherever he was.
No.
But enough to establish he's in a different place. It literally felt like he was in the same city as Liam Neeson down the block. Let the movie breathe. Establish more of your scenes. We don't need to jump right into the conversation. And, even if they extended the runtime, that's not necessarily the worst thing they could do. But they just shouldn't run every scene into another one without letting the audience breathe. That was the biggest problem. Like, literally, James Franco had like a 2-minute scene just randomly stuck in there. Like, hey, I'm James Franco. I'm in this movie.
Yeah, like, we see him a little bit, and then we don't see him again. You're right, for like probably close to an hour.
And I was like, okay, are you a person in this movie? And it finally gets, okay, you are a character. You do have a purpose. Oh, your story's over now?
That's
nice.
It barely began. Yeah.
Would have loved to have seen more from him in this movie.
And by the way, his story arc when he came around, great scene. Great scene.
I know. It was
like, there's stuff in this movie that's like really good, and that's the frustrating thing. It's just like, but it's like, it's not enough to save it for me.
Yeah, it was a lot of opportunities wasted, I think.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's move on. Our final movie in the new release section of our show is the Home Media Moment, and this week that's Run and Jump. It's a romantic drama starring Irish television's Maxine Peake as Venetia, a mother of two whose husband Connor, played by Edward McLean, suffers a stroke. When neuroscientist Dr. Ted Fielding, played by Nebraska's Will Forte, moves in to document Connor's recovery for field research, he gets close to not only Venetia in a romantic sense, but as a father figure, the couple's gay son as well, whose father has all but shunned him. This film is the feature debut for Oscar-nominated short filmmaker Steph Green. Run and Jump is a solid character study with very realistic and understated performances. There's some mild laughs here, but more than anything, the film bolsters the idea that former SNL funny man Forte perhaps should have been looking in a more dramatic direction all along. It doesn't go at a breakneck speed, but sometimes neither does life, especially when it deals a blow like the 38-year-old patriarch having a sudden stroke. Sometimes it feels like it's trying to do too much at once, so certain things in the film go unresolved or are pushed to the side, but overall it is a good film, and I give Run and Jump a B. Joe?
An interesting title, I mean, considering the circumstances.
Yeah.
This one has a quirkiness to it, but it's really sweet, and I think it's a genuinely heartfelt story, and that's really the strongest point about it. So it's difficult to really dislike this one. I think it's believable we could have, really anyone in this situation and see them have trouble dealing with it. This aided to the quasi-documentary style of the film, making it seem very lifelike, but not overbearingly so. I will admit it took a little while to get going, as Dan pointed out, but it is a satisfying ride, and I also give it a B.
Nice. Justin, what do you think of Run and Jump?
Part of the reason I love film as much as I do comes from filmmakers being able to find something original out of something done over and over again in the medium. When a character suffers from a stroke, the film usually makes that character the main focus. But in Run and Jump, the lens is turned on the family, and the struggles to get by as their father recovers, and the doctor, played by Forte, observing them. This is handled with an adequate amount of drama and a mild sense of humor as the film goes on, particularly as Ted essentially becomes part of the family. That said, there are a few other family members that get largely underutilized, although there's a really good bit near the end with Ted and the gay son. I would have loved to have seen even more. And the central conflict turning into a bit of a strange love triangle comes across as awkward as the film progresses. Though this leads to a slightly abrupt, albeit understandable conclusion, I found Run and Jump to be an interesting slice-of-life film, and I give it a B-.
Thought it was a bit abrupt at the end. I could have used another 15 minutes with this crew.
It was a little short.
Yeah. I don't think they used the daughter really at all.
No.
She exists, but she's really barely in it.
I did like some of the side characters, but I felt like there was enough of them to establish a personality, but they were a bit underutilized, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, they focused obviously a lot more on the son than the daughter, and we didn't really get to know
what her
feelings
were.
Yeah, like we didn't even really know much about how she felt about her dad having a stroke.
Not really, yeah.
And this guy living here that may or may not have something going on with the mom.
It's a little invasive.
Yeah. But I wish we got the daughter's perspective on it, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Give it a more universal look.
Yeah. I mean, it's nice that we hear from the son and the mother and the doctor himself, but, I mean, there's only one more person in your family. You could have spent a little time on that, too.
Yeah.
Forte really is...
The man?
Is quite the man. I mean, Nebraska he was so good in. Yeah, and here as well. And these are not comedic roles, really. Nebraska a little bit. He was like
he
almost
was the straight man.
He was almost the straight man, right?
He was kind of like this really
June
disgruntled
Squibb
guy.
was, and the rest of the family was kind of the
they were
the comedic relief.
Punchlines. And I mean, for him, he was really like kind of similar to this. He's kind of this guy he's down to earth. He's sort of an everyman in the situation. He's disgruntled, and I think he's doing well in that role.
Yeah,
I do think it's funny because. He really is good at these dramatic roles.
Yeah, you just never would have expected it.
Which is good.
Yeah, good for him. All right, well, let's move along here. We're going to do our top 5 train movies now. This is in honor, of course, of Snowpiercer, which takes place entirely on a train. And we did, back in February, I believe, for Nonstop, we did the top 5 plane movies. So we sort of put the same criteria to this one. More than 50% of the film should be taking place on the train for it to count. And you know what? I'll start this one. My number 5 is Trans-Siberian.
Good choice.
Thank you. Yeah, great. Somebody suggested this to me. It's very, very under the radar film, but I love Woody Harrelson, and I said, well, sure, I'll check it out. And it's really, really a good movie.
Absolutely.
I only saw it the one time when it was out, maybe 2008, somewhere.
I believe so.
Somewhere in that range. But it's really quite an interesting drama, thriller, action kind of movie. Harrelson is great, of course. And it was really one of the first times I think I had seen him in a few years. I mean, it was sort of certainly before the Hunger Games movies, but
Zombieland?
Definitely before Zombieland.
Yeah, I think it was before Zombieland, yeah. So it was nice to see him in, really tackling such a meaty role. And I actually wish that movie got more exposure. My number 4 is The Taking of Pelham 123. I like both versions of the movie. I think the 1974 version is probably more well done. The 2009 version is a little bit more popcorn friendly, let's say.
I think I remember liking it.
Either is good. I think I
that.
gave the 2009 version like a B+, 74 version like an A-. So, I didn't really pick a specific version for number 4 because they're both good. My number 3, I think Joe will appreciate, and that is Throw Mama from the Train. Classic Danny DeVito film. I haven't seen it in about 15 plus years, so I don't exactly remember how much of it takes place on the train, but obviously it's in the title, and a good portion of it is on the train, I think.
I don't really remember it that well, but
I don't remember it too well, but I think a lot of it's on the train.
I do appreciate that, though.
Yes, it's one of my favorite early Danny DeVito roles, and of course Billy Crystal as well. Number 2 is Snowpiercer. We already talked a bit about that earlier in the show, so I don't need to say too much. But I did like this movie a lot, and it's my number 2. Joe, let's go to you next for the top 5 train movies.
I'm confident none of you, and I guess none including the audience, will be able to guess my number 1.
Oh, cool.
This ought to be interesting.
But number 5 is Polar Express. I mean, this is a decent kid story, both fun and frightening, oddly enough. And it's kind of this strange blend of fantasy and mystery and even a thriller to some extent. It was a pretty good one. Number 4 is From Russia with Love. I mean, this is a classic Bond movie. Well, hey, don't laugh.
No,
it's got a great
love
scene.
it, yeah.
I mean, it's got one of the better plots, honestly, and it's got some of the most famous assassins. Just there's the idea of like Bond having to fight in close quarters is very unusual for a Bond movie, where he normally has a lot more space to move around, a lot more explosions. It's really kind of, I don't want to say it's underrated because I think people know it's one of the better ones, but it's one of the ones that nobody really talks about, and it's a good one. Number 3 is Under Siege 2. Okay.
Oh, great.
Okay. Now, I will admit...
We just had a conversation off air about Steven Seagal.
About how terrible he is, apparently.
Well,
hey.
Some say,
Hey,
yeah.
you know what? Hey, look, but I'm just going to go out and say, on a limb here and say, I will admit, this is a little bit of a guilty pleasure film, but I actually like this one better than the first one.
Nice.
Always have. I genuinely do. So, I can't put a train top 5 together without Under Siege 2.
The first one's on a boat, right?
It's on a boat.
Okay.
So it's kind of like sort of a semi-reverse Speed, except bus to boat, as opposed to...
It is, well, Speed
boat
2,
train.
yeah, cruise control, exactly.
Sandra Bullock, yep.
Yes.
But no, I mean, Under Siege 2 is great.
Is it your favorite of the Seagal films?
It's one of them.
Okay.
It's not. I mean, that one probably would go to...
Hard to Kill.
The Patriot, probably.
Oh, okay.
Actually, not the Mel Gibson one.
Oh, okay.
Yes, they're
I thought for some reason Steven Seagal was in the Mel Gibson version.
No. It's a common misconception, but no,
Gotcha.
I actually do like that one.
All
All right, number 2 is also Snowpiercer. I mean, we talked about this one. Great film, unique concept. We reviewed it, so it's number 2.
Yeah. Justin, how about you for the top 5 movies on a train?
My number 5, Before Sunrise. It begins with them on a train. Jesse and Celine meet up, and they basically roam about Europe, and the train sort of acts as a bookend to the film. The main reason I decided to put this on the list, and the reason I can't put it much higher than number 5, it does bookend the film, and it does bring a good question of, okay, if they hadn't met on the train, would they have actually ever met up? And it does act as a central component to some of their conversation. But like I said, it's got a minimal role, so I couldn't put it much further than my number 5. Number 4, The Darjeeling Limited. Great story about an existential journey. Unquestionably, my personal favorite Owen Wilson performance. I thought it was really a great venue to see them explore the various locales. And I think it's a really different take from a Wes Anderson film.
That was my number 6, actually. I like that movie a lot.
Number 3, Snowpiercer. We covered most of this. I thought it was a very thought-provoking look. And I think it really did dare to pose a question of, if you're just watching the world through a window, are you really truly living?
It's like Rear Window.
And my number 2 is The Great Train Robbery. One of the earliest films ever made, and truly a timeless classic. So many films have been inspired by this great way of showing tension both in and outside of the initial robbery. Incredibly influential film.
All right, well, my number 1 is Source Code. Yeah, great performances from Michelle Monaghan and Jake Gyllenhaal. And Vera Farmiga. In actually probably the first time I ever really... No, that's not true. Up in the Air was before that. But when I saw her, I said, hey, that's that lady from Up in the Air that I like so much. Yeah, she does a great job in this movie as well. Really just, we spoke about this briefly when we reviewed The Edge of Tomorrow, because it's in that same sort of vein of waking up over and over and over again. But just really, really a good sci-fi movie. And that's my number one. Joe?
I'm pretty confident neither of you would see this coming. And this would be 1990's remake of the original Narrow Margin. This is the one with Gene Hackman. It's a really tense thriller, which mostly does take place on a train, with the exception of the beginning and very end. And it's basically just about this guy who is a lawyer, kind of disgruntled, who finds a witness to a murder committed by various mobsters and tries to get her to safety up in Canada. But it turns out some assassins have tracked them down, and it's about him trying to battle with the game of wits to protect her on the train. It's a really good movie.
Nice.
I've never even heard of that, so I'm definitely interested.
Well received, but not talked about.
Yeah, I've heard of, I think, maybe the original.
The original?
I don't even know if I know they did a remake.
Yep, 1990.
Very cool, and Gene Hackman. Can't go wrong.
Probably one of my favorite Hackman movies, actually.
Nice.
And I mean, you gotta have your classic Mafia, so.
Well, that is true. Any Joe Top 5 list includes some movie with the Mafia involved. More or less.
Almost, actually. Probably.
Yeah. All right, Justin, you're number one.
Buster Keaton's The General. One of the greatest, most influential action comedies ever made. The inspiration has gone over in numerous genres. Probably one of the best chase scenes ever filmed. And just absolutely a comedy classic.
All right, well, that's going to wrap it up for the top five. Up next, and to close the show, we have our triple feature of older films. We do a new classic, which is a movie from the last 2 years that at least two of us have given a positive grade to, that we watch again. The old classic, which this week was Justin's pick, and the Oscar A to Z nominee. First up is our new classic, and that is The Conjuring. From the James Wan House of Horror, which also includes both Insidious films and the original Saw, comes this supernatural horror focusing on a real case of paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren, played by Patrick Wilson and, once again, Vera Farmiga, as they explore the Rhode Island house of the Perron family, with Ron Livingston and Lily Taylor playing the parents. Now, we discussed this movie briefly on our very first podcast last August, but those first couple shows we reviewed way more new releases because we were catching up on everything that was out at the time, so we never really got to go much into depth with The Conjuring. For all the by-the-number horror films we get in a given year, none of them resonate like The Conjuring. I say it that way because the movie doesn't really add anything new to the playbook, but its atmosphere, classically creepy shots, and overall scares, especially the intense exorcism finale that had me crying and shaking in the theater, all act as a throwback and pitch-perfect homage to some of the most classic horror films of all time. Nothing is that remarkable about the Perron family, and that helps make the horror real, the idea that this could really happen to anybody. Even the now classic clapping, which could have been hokey, adds real-deal chills. The Conjuring gets an A from me, and is by far the best horror film we've gotten in the last 2 years. Justin?
James Wan is a director who always manages to surprise me, not simply because he's probably the best contemporary horror filmmaker in the business, but because he's truly making styles seen before his own. This is truly put on display in last year's The Conjuring, where he gives us a film that provides an intriguing and well-paced story based on a real-life event that also has efficient stylistic qualities. Although the story isn't much past the familiar horror fodder, and the scares probably won't faze seasoned fans of the horror genre too terribly much, one really has to give credit for his ability to not settle for a stereotypical splatterfest that the genre has basically been reduced to in the present. Instead, The Conjuring stays true to its roots, taking its time, which allows its leads to investigate and uncover more of what's actually happening. It may not be the original game changer it was advertised as, but it's a step up from most contemporary films in the horror genre, and I give it a B.
All right, Joe, what did you think of The Conjuring?
Well, this film is basically a tribute to classic horror films of the 70s, and it has a good balance of some genuine scares and some cheesy elements, but most importantly, it has a good story and good characters. The camera work and music are great, as are the effects, and it really is a solid horror film. That is, by modern standards. When you get right down to it, it doesn't really do anything new. Still, it knows what it is and what it wants to do, and therefore it is executed fairly well, and I give it a B+.
I was horrified of this movie, by the way.
The thing is, I've seen a lot of horror movies.
Sure.
I've seen a lot of classic horror movies. This is something of an homage, and I guess in that sense it's good, but it isn't really doing anything really to stand out to me. Like, I mean, this one is kind of another example of everybody purporting it to be the best thing ever, and I went into it expecting that, and I thought it was good, but once again, I don't think I'd call it amazing.
Okay, and that's fair. I don't think, like I said, that it does add, like, anything new, but it certainly
Doesn't take anything away either.
I mean, I think it's a really good homage to those classic horror films, and for somebody like me who has seen very little of them,
No, that's good.
It definitely hit its mark.
It's funny because I've talked to some people about it recently, and I was like, oh, a lot of people like The Conjuring, and some people were like, I thought it was alright. Or like, I mean, I've heard some people that, like, I actually know a couple people that are really big into horror that thought it was okay.
Okay.
So I mean, it's like, I do agree that it's probably one of the best ones we've had in a long time. That it doesn't just reside to doing just gore and stupid jump scares. It does have a genuinely creepy atmosphere, but that's about it. Like, it's got good performances instead of having no-name actors.
That is true.
That just phone
the performances of this are pretty good.
But the characters, not really that new, not really that complex necessarily. This plot is pretty by the numbers. I mean, it's like I said, it's good. It's quite good, but it's not groundbreaking.
I think horror is such a tricky genre because people will rush out in droves to see a lot of these movies, and then they're universally, like, loathed. Like Devil Inside's a good example of that. That opened to like $40 or $50 million on like a $1 million budget. But it's pretty much universally hated.
Yeah.
And so then, okay, next month, The Woman in Black came out. Oh, let's go see that. That opened to like $30 or $40 million. And then people really didn't like that one. So it's like, it's this tricky genre. And I don't know if that's because people have seen so many of them that they're desensitized to it.
It's just,
so it's, I mean, Justin, you haven't had a really one that you loved in about 6 years.
It's just essentially a genre that's really hard to bring something that new and original to the table. I mean, yes, you could probably say The Cabin in the Woods, but I think we'd all agree that it's more comedy focused than necessarily straight up horror.
Correct.
Like, almost every venue has been explored. Most of the new venues are criticized, if not publicly condemned as lowbrow snuff.
Mm-hmm.
Which a lot of them really you
are.
could say
Yeah, it's not a complete misnomer.
No, I mean, I do think, though, that some of the best horror movies do have a certain amount of weight to them, like, behind the story, and at least they have some sense of originality, and they have this huge atmosphere that just makes you feel unnerved and, unsatisfied, and just honestly just creeped out throughout most of the film, instead of just residing to just doing, let's just have the same formula, let's just have a lot of blood, let's have some loud noises. It's just, something where people go out to have cheap thrills for a weekend and then forget about it. Which is what they pump them out to do, and I feel like horror's kind of just been lumped into being that as sort of like the trash of film. And I mean, I think that's unfair because there are some amazing horror movies, just not many within the past couple decades.
Yeah. Well, I think that's why Sinister seemed to resonate with a lot of audiences.
Sinister's good.
Because it was taking that found footage concept that started, with Blair Witch and then Paranormal Activity and stuff, and added these kind of new twists to it, along with some interesting characters.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
I mean, we ran that as a new classic last year, so we already talked about that. But, I mean, the reason I decided to run this for this week's new classic was because last week we had Deliver Us from Evil, which Joe and I liked a bit more than Justin, but I think we can all agree it wasn't
the best.
It wasn't amazing. So, I thought, let's watch probably the best horror that we've had the last couple of years. Justin just informed me earlier today that later this year there is the doll movie.
Annabelle,
that creepy doll from The Conjuring. And then, of course, The Conjuring 2 is next summer. So, a couple of, new things to add to the playbook. I was not happy to hear about the doll movie.
Speaking of things that are kind of more reminiscent of recent horror movies.
Non-stop sequels?
Well, non-stop sequels and just the doll, the really forced, creepy doll, that was just silly.
To be fair, Don't blame the doll on the producers. Blame the fact that the doll got its own movie because people kept saying, "Oh, the doll was really creepy," but it basically got a guest appearance.
The doll was creepy, but it felt like it was a completely different movie. Like that whole first scene just feels like, ooh, it's about this creepy haunted doll. No, this is just an intro that has nothing to do with anything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's just like,
all right, well, we're going to move to our old classic, and Justin picked this one, and that is Ravenous.
After we do this review, I'm going to go get some steak. Because I'm feeling rather ravenous.
That's right.
Captain John Boyd, played by Guy Pearce, has just come back from winning a bloody battle in the Mexican-American War, only to have it discovered that he only survived by an act of sheer cowardice. As punishment, Boyd is sent to Fort Spencer as third in command as a mysterious stranger named Cahoon, played by Robert Carlyle, who may or may not have developed a taste for human flesh from his encounters in the wilderness, joins their party. Prior to my pick, Joe challenged me to run a film that would essentially serve as what I like to call a stir-the-pot film, meaning something that my colleagues may not necessarily like per se, but gives us plenty to talk about. I narrowed it down to 5 choices, and Joe randomly selected Ravenous, a supernatural thriller / quasi-western with a bit of dark humor thrown in, though how much of it's there is probably a question of how twisted the viewer's mind truly is. If it's nothing else, it's original, which is part of the reason why I found this an interesting choice to discuss. Although Ravenous is tonally all over the place, the protagonist and antagonist, played by, as I mentioned, Pearce and Carlyle respectively, are truly interesting characters, and their conflicts through deeper themes such as dealing with cowardice and struggling to survive really give the film its best moments. I truly wanted to say meaty there, but I promised Dan no puns this week. This is paired with some well-placed cinematography and a very unique score to the film, which will likely be loved or hated. Unfortunately, this doesn't always help viewers to look past some of the film's flaws, but like I said, Ravenous definitely has originality on its side, and for those looking for something a bit different, and haven't eaten ahead of time, might find it worth seeking out, and I give it a B-.
I think they should eat afterwards. Because when they get sick before seeing the movie? Because, I mean, if you eat and you see these things happening, won't you get a turning your stomach?
He also said eaten ahead. Ahead of time, okay? So that was a pun, unintentional.
That's good, though.
No pun intended. Joe, what'd you think of Ravenous?
Well, it definitely made me hungry. So I don't know what that says about me. I do want to say, I'm just going to start off by saying that had this film just stopped switching up its soundtrack to try and be funny, it would have been much better. I'll just get that out of the way immediately. Though it does show how much a simple track of music can alter a scene, which is very interesting. The creepy nature of the film and the mystery are worthwhile, and it does lead to a decent conclusion. The third act of the film is actually rather good. Still, much of the beginning feels disjointed, and it's just kind of there. Once things get going, it is interesting, but it doesn't really grab your attention till about the first half hour. It's a very mixed bag, but the second half of the film did redeem the first part for me quite a bit, so it evened out to being a C+.
Wow, very interesting, Joe.
More upon reflection, I would say.
Okay. Well, I did not care for this movie. Justin, it's funny, as I was listening back to last week's show, and specifically your review for Deliver Us from Evil, which you gave a D to, I couldn't help but think how Ravenous falls into some of those categories that you didn't like that film for. To paraphrase, it takes a third of the movie to even understand what's going on, and it's largely due to the genre hopping, which does not work. I didn't seem to have those same issues with Deliver Us from Evil, and obviously you don't find them to be a problem with Ravenous, but I think they certainly apply here. The comedy attempts are seemingly out of nowhere and not clever. Much of the soundtrack, as you both kind of mentioned, is hideously juxtaposed with the scenes. And I just don't know who this film is even for. It's not funny enough for comedy fans. It seems way too slow and artsy for horror fans. And I would think it's too gross or bloody for art house goers. It has some good cinematography, I'll give you that. The general idea is likable, and even the concept is likable. It's pretty much a D film, but for some reason, Justin has been chomping at the bit this entire year to bring an old classic that I fail. And since I cannot imagine that you actually like a film I'll find worse than this, I'm fine with giving it that F. This movie was just not for me.
I thought the acting was decent.
The acting was fine. I mean, Principal Rooney was good. Guy Pearce. But I mean, I don't think it was anything. David Arquette was
I don't know.
annoying as always.
I do think the third act of the movie was actually really good. Like, I really liked the ending. I liked that last part.
Yeah, the end was okay.
It was good, I thought. I thought it was an average movie by Film Fanatics standards.
Well,
I mean, I think there is... I thought the acting was good. The costumes were good. The cinematography was good. The concept's really cool. And I think that there is some good dramatic tension and dialogue towards the end of the movie. I do think that the first act is boring and all over the place. I do think it does take a while to get going. And the attempts at comedy are terrible.
The comedy attempts are probably the worst part of the movie.
Some of the soundtrack is good, though, when it works. Some of the soundtrack did fit the scenes.
About a third of it did fit the scene.
And then other one parts it didn't. So, I mean...
But 2/3 of it doesn't, in my opinion.
I do think it's sort of a weird mesh of genres. I do think it's kind of mediocre.
I think if they had stuck with the thriller, horror-ish genre...
That was my favorite part.
Yeah, that was really the only good part of all the 3 or 4 genres that it's trying to be. I mean, I guess if you want to still set it in the West, that's fine, too. It could be kind of a Western.
There are Western horrors.
Yeah, there's some Western horrors.
Witches and stuff. No, I mean, I didn't like it, like I said, about halfway through, and then once they started revealing what was happening, you saw some people come back. I did feel like the plot did start to kind of go somewhere. Once it found its place towards that third act, I thought it was fine. But I will admit it did take a while to get going. And upon thinking about it, I did like it. But like I said, I do think that some of the soundtrack was really off and some of the comedy was really off. But I liked the performances. I liked the characters generally. And it felt like an underdeveloped idea. Like they could have just cut out maybe like the first part where they were
I liked the concept of it. And that's what's annoying about it, is that they chose to do this, like, let's do a wacky soundtrack and put in some comedy that falls completely flat.
I'm not even sure it really was a comedy. Like I said, the only thing about it that seemed comedic was the fact they chose really twangy, silly music in some of the scenes. Yeah, but the one
character, the cannibal, really, the main cannibal, was, trying to do, like, bits and stuff, and, like, he was trying to have, like, little phrases.
He was trying to kind of mess with them the way the Joker would. Like, it would be kind of funny, but it isn't really funny.
I guess.
Like, he was a psycho, basically. Yeah. So I was okay with it.
And David Arquette, he was supposed to be some sort of comic relief, I think.
Yeah.
As he usually is.
Yeah.
I don't generally care for him anyway, except for in the Scream movies, so that didn't really appeal to me either. I mean, like I said, it's probably a D, but Justin really has been wanting me to fail something. And
which is only half true, but...
It's half... No. But it is half true.
Well, hey, Justin, you should be defending this more. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, yes. I have been curious to see if I will ever run something that will give you an F. I figured that was going to be until next year where I truly step up my game, because Joe mentioned that for Guilty Pleasure Month we didn't go quite hard enough.
I don't think we did.
Well, listen, if I fail at Guilty Pleasure, that's a sort of different ball of wax.
Yeah.
I mean, Guilty Pleasures are supposed to be either loved or loathed.
Yeah.
By definition.
To answer offer a minor counterpoint to your who is this movie really for, I agree with you to some extent, but I also feel it's kind of in the cult movie status. Kind of, sort of like Evil Dead 2. Yes, it's gory. Yes, it's bizarre, but it's also, at the same time, for the people I think would get it, will be on board with it.
But cult movies still fall into a genre. It's just not, it's a cult movie. A cult movie of what? Like a horror? For horror fans? For comedy fans? Like Clerks is a cult movie.
Yeah.
But it's a comedy cult movie. It's not a drama or horror.
Then to expand on that, I would say like cult horror or cult horror comedy, like I said with Evil Dead 2.
I don't think it is really much of a comedy, though.
It isn't, but there are people out there who do really think this is a legitimately funny movie.
And to be fair, as we were watching it and before it started, Justin really was trying to hit the comedy aspect of it, which, if it was going for comedy, it was certainly one of the weaker elements of the movie.
The only times I laughed, and I did laugh a couple times, I thought was like when it was intentionally like trying too hard, and I thought that was funny. But I didn't I feel like if you look at this movie as kind of almost like a self-parody, like seriously, the music switching it up, trying to make it a comedy, was funny because it was so out of place. If that was the intention, I'll give them points for that. But I'm pretty sure
It's hard, right? I don't think it was.
It's
right.
hard to say.
In all honesty, I can't give you a yes or no question to that because even when I saw it the first time, I was kind of wondering that.
You know what I mean? It just seems so jarring. Like, I mean, even if you have general musical taste, you know the difference between upbeat tempo and
correct,
kind of like, you know, more frightening, dramatic. I just,
yeah,
like I said, some of the music worked well. Just a lot of it was all over the place.
Well, with that in mind, we move into our final film of the show, and that's our Oscar nominee A to Z. And this one was a 2007 film up for Best Supporting Actress for Ruby Dee, and also Art Direction. So Joe's going to tell us about American Gangster.
It is a biographical crime drama directed by Ridley Scott and written by Steve Zalian. It revolves around Frank Lucas, played by Denzel Washington, a crime boss who smuggled heroin into the U.S. from Vietnam at the height of the Vietnam War. It also follows Richie Roberts, played by Russell Crowe, the detective who eventually takes him down. This film attempts to balance the two stories that are basically separate but intertwined by the end of the film. Lucas starts out as a limo driver for the legendary Bumpy Johnson, the bootlegger who eventually he inherits the responsibilities of to control Harlem's underworld. Conversely, Roberts is hated by his precinct for being one of the few honest cops in his department. As I was looking through the synopsis, I was surprised on how my original observations were justified. American Gangster has decent performances from its leads and supporting cast, and potential for a really good story. The problem is that it wants to tell two stories equally, with one ultimately being much more interesting than the other. Lucas's rise to power is fascinating, but there really isn't that much time spent on it, and the events themselves are mostly done in disjointed fragments. We barely have time to establish his allies, cohorts, enemies, or even his love interest. The brunt of the film is actually on Robert's struggle to retain his honor. This isn't bad, it just isn't as thrilling as the crime story. Even worse, there is no direct connection between the two stories until the end of the second act, as if to establish the duality between the two men and their journeys. Even if their arcs were similar, it really seems like two separate films that just decided to meet in Act 3. The scene where the two face off should have a great deal more weight, but something really is missing. It's meant to be seen as a personal struggle, but really it's just circumstantial, at least the way it's presented. The acting is decent, but it's bogged down by an underdeveloped and uneven script, and I give it a C.
Justin, we're going to go to you because you actually had this as your original old classic before we realized, oh wait, that's actually this week's Oscar movie, and you picked Ravenous. So let's go to you first.
You stirred the pot twice.
Yeah.
When we discussed movies that should not have been nominated for Best Picture, back in Season 1, I dared to put Juno on my list, and was understandably asked days after recording what would I have put in its place. I didn't really have an answer then, but after watching American Gangster twice now, I am still shocked that it wasn't in the running. Director Ridley Scott offers up an original crime story set in Harlem, focusing on the life of Frank Lucas, a man who went from being a mere driver to a truly ruthless gangster. While capturing the cultural zeitgeist starting from the late 60s is absolutely spot on, and well deserving of its Best Art Direction nomination, this is also paired with what I will happily disagree with Joe as an equal emphasis on Richie Roberts, played by Crowe, and his fight to bring Lucas to justice. Although I realize I'm in the minority on this with my colleagues, I do admire the extra dimension to the narrative, knowing who to focus on at just the right moment. Although I do admit the finale is a bit rushed, I still find American Gangster to be one of 2007's most underrated films, and I give it an A.
Wow. Well, Joe, you and I hit on a lot of the same points both as we were watching the film and in a brief discussion a few days after the fact. This movie, I'm sorry, Justin, is far from an Oscar snub. I don't think it's one of Denzel's best performances. I mean, he's fine in it, but I mean, he was better in Philadelphia, Flight. I thought he was better in Two Guns. But more to the point, he's kind of a supporting character in the story. I have to disagree with you. It's not an even story at all.
Not really.
It's Russell Crowe's movie, so
yeah.
Maybe Oscar voters were confused when Washington was on the ballot for Best Actor when he's clearly in the supporting role here.
It's true.
Ruby Dee, who was up for supporting actress,
she's barely in it,
was probably the best thing about the film acting-wise and is really only in a few minutes of the movie. So I think somewhere there was some confusion about whose story it was really supposed to be. I will say that the film held my interest enough, and it does have great cinematography and art direction. I can totally see why it was nominated in that category, but Gangster is lacking in the excitement department for nearly 2.5 hour running time. It gets a B- from me. obviously, you saw some things we weren't seeing. You really think that this was a pretty even story, though, between the two of them?
Yeah, I mean, you're trying to capture both sides of the story, which I think it does a decent job of. Yes, there's a greater emphasis on Richie Roberts at times, but there's also a pretty good chunk of time where they focus on Frank Lucas. They're just trying to give you two separate sides to this story, which I think is pretty good. Far more than can be said for other movies like Goodfellas, where it's straight up all about the gangsters the entire time, or even Casino for that matter.
Because it's actually about the gangsters.
Yeah, I mean,
it is about them, but if you're
the gangsters.
But is it really their fault that they're not?
Untouchables is mostly about the cops. De Niro has a couple scenes.
Yeah, but
He doesn't really need to have his whole side. He's the bad guy.
But I don't fault them for doing that, is what I'm saying. I don't think it's fair on your parts to criticize them for tackling the cop angle as well.
I'm just saying it's a little misleading to make it seem like it's about the gangster when it's really not.
Yeah,
but it is.
Partially.
I don't agree with that.
He has a couple scenes that are really good, but there is definitely more screen time with Russell Crowe. Absolutely.
I would say much more.
There is significantly more. And I'll admit the scenes with Frank Lucas are good, but there are scenes where he's establishing his enemies, like Cuba Gooding Jr.'s character. This guy's supposed to be like this huge monumental rival. He gets 2 scenes. I don't even know his name. He had a couple lines of dialogue exchanged. There's very little time to establish these relationships because there's so much time spent with Roberts' character.
Yeah, because they're trying to capture both angles.
That's because there isn't enough time spent on the gangster element. I mean, really, there just isn't. There is more time spent with the cop element, and it's just not that interesting. And in fact, most of the stuff is actually about Roberts' individual story, which is fine, but it's really not related to Lucas at all for about the first half or more of the movie. I think it's great to have 2 sides to a story.
You're right. You're criticizing it for it.
Because they don't do it evenly.
We're criticizing the handling of it. Most movies should have 2 sides. But it was so off balance with what they devoted the
honestly,
time to.
The cop side stuff was pretty generic and not that interesting.
I don't know. I mean, they were trying to handle the investigation. I'm not quite sure where you...
But the first, hour or so with Russell Crowe doesn't have anything to do with that. It's just establishing him and his story. It feels like it's completely separate.
Because you need to understand him as a character to get
but we have
involved in
the
the
huge,
actual storyline.
unseparated segments with Russell Crowe. We get little disbursements interspersed
because you're trying to because they're trying to show them both as individual characters.
That's true. But they will have more scenes uninterrupted with Crowe, but with Denzel, especially as the film goes on, it becomes much more scattershot.
Right.
Which they're basically doing with Crowe, and you're saying that there was far too much of that. You're saying there's not enough of Denzel, which I think is questionable at best.
There is more time with Russell Crowe, and at the very least, unseparated by scenes. It's true. There are huge segments that are just cop. It is true.
There are, but there's also big segments with gangster as well.
And they are less than any of the cop scenes. Watch the movie again.
They're interspersed, and I would say they're fairly distributed.
Maybe you just cared more about the cop story, which is fine, but you can't tell me they were evenly distributed because they were not.
I'm sorry, but they were.
Maybe you'd like the way it was distributed, which is fine. But I think time-wise, and I think, Dan, you could back me up on this.
More time spent with Russell Crowe.
And that's just what bothered me. If it had been a little more even, I probably would have been fine with the movie. But I was disappointed because I wanted to see more of that story.
And I would like to note that we did choose to watch the theatrical cut. There is an extended version that runs about 20 minutes longer, which may very well have added more to the story.
Hey,
I can't speak to that.
I like my extended cuts. That's always good to know. It's always good to know.
All right, well, if you haven't seen American Gangster yet, grab a stopwatch, and you can judge for yourself who's in it more. But as for us, that is going to wrap up the show. Joe, what do you got going on the Merlin channel?
Let's see. I did post a couple videos recently. There's the Final Godzilla video to check out. And also, I recently watched a movie with some friends. It's this Spanish horror comedy called Witching and Bitching. And it was a surprisingly entertaining movie. And a couple friends and I did a review about that.
Well, that sounds very interesting.
So if you like Evil Dead, I'd say check it out.
Okay, cool. And pretty soon we'll be doing our listener choice for Old Classic again. So if you do have a suggestion for August's listener's choice, you can let us know that on the Facebook group, which if you're not a member of, you can join that as well. That's Film Fanatics with an exclamation point. You can, of course, subscribe to the YouTube channel here. And as well, our Twitter feed up and running at Film Fanatics Pod, and we started posting the 5-word reviews on there as well as our Facebook group. That's going to do it for the show this week. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here next week. Bye!